This is also a time of change for my family.
The meeting had already begun when King Charles looked toward the far side of the throne room and suddenly stopped speaking. His expression changed before anyone understood why. Standing where only a small circle had expected to see senior royal figures was Camilla's son, Tom Parker Bowles. Charles lowered his notes, stared across the room, and brought the entire meeting to an abrupt halt, turning an ordinary palace gathering into a deeply personal confrontation. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles had entered Buckingham Palace, expecting control. The private gathering had been arranged to discuss upcoming ceremonial plans, with Queen Camilla, Prince William, officials and selected guests around him. The throne room, a formal palace chamber used for major royal occasions, carried weight beyond an ordinary meeting room. That was why the king's reaction mattered. Tom was family through Camilla, but he was not a working royal, and Charles had not expected him there. The king set his notes down slowly. "Who authorized this?" he asked, keeping his voice low. Camilla felt the danger immediately. She looked toward her son, then back at her husband, caught between protecting Tom from embarrassment and stopping Charles from turning surprise into confrontation. The queen consort had seen him angry before, but this felt different. He was controlled, almost too controlled, and the silence around him grew heavier. William said nothing. The prince watched an aide move toward the approved attendance list and check names against the version sent to Charles's office. Seconds later, the problem became clear. Tom's name appeared on the updated list, but not on the copy the monarch had received. Someone had added him late, and nobody had ensured the king knew. The future king understood that this was no longer about one unexpected guest. It was about who could alter access without Charles knowing. Charles pushed his chair back and stood. The scrape broke the silence. He said the discussion would not continue until he understood exactly how the guest list had been changed. Camilla tightened her hands while Tom remained still, aware that his presence had become the center of the room. William looked toward his father, reading the deeper concern behind the anger. The doors were closed. The meeting stopped. One question now hung over everyone inside Buckingham Palace. If Charles had not approved Tom's presence, who had? And why had the throne room been chosen? What looked like one awkward appearance was about to expose a far more sensitive conflict over family, access, and the invisible line separating the king's private life from the crown. For Camilla, the silence inside the throne room carried a danger no protocol could soften. On one side stood the man whose reign depended on discipline, symbolism, and boundaries. On the other stood her son, suddenly placed at the center of an uncomfortable royal dispute. Tom had entered expecting a private family connection to protect him from misunderstanding. Instead, Camilla watched Charles's expression harden and realized that husband, son, and monarchy had collided in the same room. Camilla knew Tom Parker Bowles occupied a difficult place around royal life. He was her son, and therefore deeply tied to her private world, but he was not a working member of the royal family, meaning he held no official duty representing the crown. That difference mattered to Charles. The king had spent years trying to keep personal relationships separate from formal responsibilities, especially inside rooms connected to ceremony and royal authority. Camilla moved closer to her husband and lowered her voice. She asked whether they could speak privately before anything else was decided. Her concern was no longer about the halted meeting. She feared Tom would leave believing Charles had rejected him personally. The queen consort could already sense the embarrassment building around her son as officials looked away and waited for someone else to speak first. Tom finally broke the silence. He told his mother that he had never intended to create trouble and had arrived believing everything had been cleared. He had been given no warning that his presence might be questioned. Camilla touched his arm and told him not to leave. Yet even as she tried to calm him, one memory returned with uncomfortable force. Days earlier, she had discussed the possibility of Tom attending with a member of her household. She remembered the conversation clearly. What she could not remember was ever hearing Charles personally approve it. William noticed that uncertainty immediately. The prince remained controlled, but privately he began questioning how a family suggestion had become an official invitation. Someone had either misunderstood the request or allowed the difference between private permission and royal authorization to disappear. The future king understood why his father was disturbed. If that line could be crossed once without Charles knowing, it could happen again. The tension shifted when Camilla guided Tom into an adjoining room. She kept one hand briefly on his arm and told him again to stay. Seconds later, Charles entered. He closed the door himself and faced them without aides between them. The king asked one simple question. What, exactly, had each of them been told? Tom said he believed his attendance had been approved. Camilla admitted she had discussed the idea, but had never received direct confirmation. Charles listened without interrupting. Their answers did not match. Before Charles could decide whether this was a simple misunderstanding, he needed to understand the moment when the boundary had first begun to move. The real beginning of the crisis had not occurred inside the throne room. It began days earlier, during a smaller conversation that seemed harmless at the time. A ceremonial planning luncheon had brought Camilla, Tom, and 2 palace staff members together under relaxed circumstances. One suggestion was made, one assumption followed, and nobody stopped to clarify what it meant. By the time Charles saw Tom inside the throne room, that overlooked moment had already become the point of no return. Camilla had been discussing a future reception linked to food, charity, and cultural patronage, areas where Tom's professional background made his presence seem useful rather than unusual. The queen consort believed the conversation was informal. A ceremonial reception, in simple terms, is an official royal gathering built around a public or charitable purpose. That difference mattered, because the moment an idea moved from private conversation into official planning, the rules around access changed. Camilla remembered the exact trigger. 3 days before the stopped meeting, during a private luncheon at Clarence's house, she turned to an aide and said, "Tom could be useful for that discussion." She meant it as a suggestion. The staff member heard it as approval. From that single sentence, the possibility of Tom attending moved quietly into the planning process, without anyone returning to Charles for direct confirmation. Charles felt the weight of that mistake immediately when the sequence was explained. The king had already asked that private family invitations and formal royal meetings never be mixed without his knowledge. To him, this was not a technical error. It touched a boundary he believed had already been made clear. He understood Camilla had not deliberately challenged him, but the result still made him feel bypassed. Camilla felt guilt rising alongside frustration. She knew her words had carried more authority than she intended, yet she also feared Charles would treat the mistake as proof that she had interfered. Tom had never asked to be placed inside the dispute, and she could not accept the idea that one careless sentence might turn her son into a symbol of palace overreach. William then learned another detail that changed the mood again. The attendance list had been amended after the luncheon, but the revised version had reached only part of the household. The prince discovered that Charles had walked into the meeting carrying the original list. That explained the shock completely. As far as the monarch knew, Tom had simply appeared inside a formal gathering without warning. Charles placed both versions of the list beside each other. He read them once, then again. Finally, he tapped Tom's added name with one finger and said nothing. The mystery of how he entered the room was solved. The question of who controlled that room was not. With the invitation exposed, the argument could no longer hide behind paperwork. Charles and Camilla now had to face each other directly. When Charles finally spoke to Camilla without aides surrounding them, The disagreement stopped being about an attendance list. Years of balancing marriage, family, duty, and public expectation were suddenly compressed into a single conversation. Camilla believed her son had been embarrassed over an innocent misunderstanding. Charles believed a royal boundary he had clearly protected had been crossed. Neither raised their voice at first. That made the exchange more dangerous, because every measured word carried the weight of something much larger. Charles kept his tone controlled, but the anger beneath it was impossible to miss. The king explained that the throne room was not simply another palace chamber. It was a ceremonial space, tied to formal royal occasions and the authority of the crown, which made unapproved participation far more serious in his mind. He was not accusing Tom of chasing status. He was questioning how anyone had entered that meeting without his knowledge. Camilla pushed back immediately. She told her husband that Tom had not asked for a title, a royal role, or any special privilege. He had believed he was helping with a limited discussion, connected to subjects he understood. The queen consort's voice tightened as she defended him. Her frustration came from something deeper than embarrassment. She feared her son was being made to feel that his connection to her was itself a problem. Charles did not soften. He told her the issue was not Tom Parker Bowles personally. The issue was that the monarch had walked into his own formal meeting and discovered someone there whom he had never approved. That difference mattered because the king believed authority became meaningless if decisions could be made around him first and explained afterward. Camilla felt the argument turn sharply when Charles revealed something she had not expected. He said this was not the first time members of staff had struggled to understand where her private wishes ended and official authorization began. According to a documented internal account of their conversation, he referred to several smaller moments that had already caused confusion. The Queen suddenly realized he had been noticing these incidents quietly rather than confronting her each time. The silence became harder. Camilla looked at him and asked the question she had been avoiding. "Do you want Tom removed?" Charles paused. He stood near the fireplace while she remained seated, waiting for an answer that could change the meaning of the entire confrontation. The king finally said the meeting would resume only after the role of every person present had been made completely clear. Camilla understood what that meant. This was no longer only about protecting her son from humiliation. Charles was drawing a line around access to the monarch himself. And once that line was drawn, the palace would have to decide whether it applied even to the queen's own household. Palaces run on ceremony, but they survive on permission. Behind every closed door is an unseen structure, deciding who enters, who waits, and who never reaches the room at all. After Charles halted the meeting, that structure came under scrutiny. Yet the most revealing moment was not found in protocol manuals. It came when Prince William watched his father study the amended guest list and understood that Charles felt something deeply personal. Control over his own royal environment had slipped without warning. Charles knew the problem reached far beyond one name on one list. The sovereign's office handled the king's official schedule, while the queen's household managed Camilla's duties and personal staff. Private secretaries coordinated decisions, event planners arranged attendance, and security teams acted on the final approved instructions. In simple terms, royal access depended on several offices working from the same decision. If one casual request was misunderstood higher up the chain, a personal suggestion could suddenly look like formal authorization. William watched his father's anger begin to change into disappointment. The prince understood why. Charles had spent years trying to keep private affection from creating confusion around official duty, and now that exact danger had appeared inside his own meeting. The king was not simply asking who made a mistake. He wanted to know whether the system around him was clear enough to stop the same mistake from happening again. Camilla felt the situation growing larger than it needed to be. She worried that Tom was becoming a symbol for every unclear boundary inside the palace. The queen consort believed her son had entered in good faith, yet the review now seemed to place his presence at the center of a much wider argument about authority. She looked toward William, hoping he might encourage Charles to treat the entire incident as a family misunderstanding. William did the opposite. He supported the clarification. The future king told his father that relatives who were not working royals should receive direct approval before attending meetings connected to official functions. Charles agreed and instructed staff to make that rule clear immediately. Camilla said little, but her disappointment was obvious. The room eventually emptied, yet William stayed behind. He told Charles quietly that ambiguity might feel kinder in the moment, but it would only create another confrontation later. The king looked exhausted. Then he asked the question that revealed how personally he was carrying the decision. "Does this make me look cruel?" William did not answer quickly. He told his father that kindness did not require uncertainty, and that Tom deserved a clear answer more than a comfortable misunderstanding. Charles absorbed those words in silence. The rule was now clear. Its first real test would come within minutes, when the king decided what should happen to Tom that very afternoon. Tom Parker Bowles had arrived believing he was stepping into an unusual but legitimate family-adjacent conversation. He left, understanding that his presence had triggered something much larger than himself. The embarrassment was not loud. Nobody escorted him through a crowd, and no confrontation unfolded in public. Instead, the damage came through a few quiet sentences delivered behind palace doors, where Charles attempted to restore control without humiliating Camilla's son, and discovered that even a careful decision could still wound everyone involved. Charles made the decision plainly. Tom would not return to the formal part of the meeting because his attendance had never received proper approval. The king stressed that this was about process, not punishment. A formal royal meeting, in simple terms, is an official gathering tied to the monarch's duties rather than a private family occasion. That distinction mattered because Charles wanted Tom to understand that he was not being rejected as Camilla's son. Tom absorbed the words without anger. He told Charles that if he had known there was any doubt about his invitation, he would never have entered the room. His embarrassment came from realizing that people around him had gone silent because of his presence. Camilla heard that admission and felt the weight of her own part in it. The queen consort had wanted to include her son in something useful. Instead, she now feared she had made him feel like an outsider. Charles softened, but he did not reverse course. He apologized directly for the confusion and for the way the meeting had stopped so suddenly. The king made clear that Tom had done nothing deliberately wrong. Yet he also said the decision had to stand, because changing it now would turn a rule into something negotiable whenever family feelings became uncomfortable. Tom then admitted something that struck Camilla harder than Charles expected. He said he had believed his mother's earlier suggestion meant everything was settled. He had trusted that if she had mentioned his attendance, the palace would handle the rest. Camilla immediately understood the deeper problem. Her casual words did not always remain casual once staff began acting on them. Tom collected his coat from the adjoining chamber. Camilla watched him prepare to leave, then stepped forward and embraced him briefly. He told her not to blame herself, but she did. Charles remained several steps away, visibly uneasy, knowing that restoring order had carried a personal cost. The door closed behind Tom. That sound changed Camilla. She no longer wanted staff explanations, revised lists, or another argument filtered through palace procedure. She wanted Charles alone, without titles or offices between them. Tom's exit ended the immediate disruption, but it also stripped away every excuse, leaving Charles and Camilla with the marriage beneath the monarchy. Hours after the stopped meeting, the palace had returned to routine, but Charles and Camilla had not. Without aides, lists, secretaries, or ceremonial language between them, The disagreement finally became honest. Camilla no longer argued about whether Tom should have remained inside the throne room. Charles no longer spoke about authorization. Instead, husband and wife confronted the fear beneath everything. She feared her family would always remain outsiders, while he feared private affection could blur responsibilities he could never escape. Camilla asked for the conversation herself. She wanted no staff present, and no message carried through private secretaries. A private secretary, in simple terms, is a senior royal aide who helps manage official duties, decisions, and communication. Tonight, the Queen Consort wanted none of that machinery between them. She needed Charles to hear her as a mother, not as part of an office. Camilla told him the hardest moment had not been the halted meeting. It had been watching Tom realize that his presence had become a problem because of something she had said casually. She admitted that she should have been clearer. Still, she could not hide the pain of seeing her son leave, feeling as though he had crossed a line he never knew existed. Charles listened without interrupting. The king finally admitted that he regretted how suddenly everything had stopped. He knew the silence, the questioning, and Tom's departure had made the moment harsher than he intended. But he also told her that pretending not to notice would have created a dangerous precedent. If one unclear invitation was ignored, the next one would become harder to challenge. Camilla's anger began to give way to resolve. She accepted that her household needed a sharper line between personal wishes and official instructions. The Queen Consort no longer defended the confusion itself. Instead, she asked for one promise. When future decisions touched her children, Charles should speak to her directly, before uncertainty spread through staff. Charles agreed. He said he did not want another misunderstanding growing in silence around either of them. Camilla then asked the question she had carried since Tom walked away. "Are you angry with him?" Charles answered immediately. "No." That single word changed the room. Camilla finally relaxed. The king reached across the table and took her hand, making clear that his anger had been directed at the breakdown in boundaries, not at her son. They agreed Tom deserved to hear that personally. Charles would speak to him directly, rather than let him remember the day only as humiliation. Inside the palace, the emotional crisis was finally beginning to settle. Outside its gates, however, the image of a king stopping his own meeting was about to become irresistible. By the following morning, the private discomfort of three people had become public theater. Headlines reduced a complicated family misunderstanding to a dramatic collision between king, queen, and son. Commentators debated access, influence, and royal boundaries. Yet one image captured the mood more powerfully than any analysis. Cameras outside Buckingham Palace showing visitors gathering near the gates, as broadcasters repeated the same extraordinary detail: that Charles had personally stopped a meeting after noticing Tom inside the throne room. Charles understood immediately why the story had exploded. The throne room was not being treated as an ordinary palace space, because it represents royal ceremony and direct connection to the crown. Royal protocol, in simple terms, is the set of formal rules and customs that guide how official royal events are handled. That was why commentators focused less on Tom personally and more on how a non-working relative had entered a formal discussion without the king knowing. Camilla hated the way the story was being framed. She watched broadcasters turn a private misunderstanding into a battle between husband and son, while the apology, the explanation, and the emotional conversation from the night before remained invisible. The Queen Consort knew Tom had not tried to claim influence, yet the public language around the incident made it sound as though he had deliberately crossed into royal authority. Charles felt the same danger from a different direction. The king worried that Tom Parker Bowles would be painted as someone seeking privilege, when he had simply trusted that the invitation was valid. Palace officials therefore issued a careful response, stressing that attendance procedures had been clarified. They did not blame a single aide. That choice mattered. Charles wanted the problem understood as a failure of process, not an act of betrayal. Tom made his own decision. He would not answer every headline or defend himself through public statements. His silence removed fuel from the story and made clear that he had no interest in turning embarrassment into a wider family feud. Camilla respected that choice, though she knew it came at a personal cost. Then came the image that defined the morning. One newspaper carried the huge front-page words, "King halts palace meeting," beside Buckingham Palace. Outside the gates, a television correspondent told viewers that the dispute centered on access and authorization, not any official role for Tom. Visitors gathered nearby as the story spread. Charles saw the headline over breakfast. He folded the paper and looked toward Camilla. "Tom should hear from me before he hears another version from television." The Queen said nothing for a moment, then agreed. The public had already delivered its drama. Now Charles had one final private responsibility: to decide what this moment would mean inside his own family. The incident ended not with another confrontation, but with clarity. Charles had stopped a meeting because he believed a boundary around the crown had been crossed, without his knowledge. Camilla had defended a son she never intended to place in an official role. Tom had carried the embarrassment of becoming the visible face of a palace mistake he did not create. What followed transformed an awkward interruption into something more meaningful, a test of whether royal duty could remain firm without destroying family trust. Charles spoke directly with Tom Parker Bowles, and made one thing clear from the beginning: the decision had never been meant as a personal rejection. The king explained that formal royal spaces follow rules that ordinary family gatherings do not. In simple terms, an official royal meeting is tied to the monarch's public responsibilities, meaning attendance cannot be treated like a private family invitation. Tom understood the distinction. He told Charles he had never wanted an unofficial place inside royal decision-making and would not knowingly cross that line. Charles did not hide his regret. He admitted that stopping the meeting so suddenly had caused embarrassment, and that Tom had been caught in a situation he did not create. But the monarch also said he did not regret demanding clarity. Tom accepted that answer without turning the moment into another confrontation. For the first time since the crisis began, both men were speaking about the same thing, rather than defending different assumptions. Camilla felt the tension ease when she learned how the conversation had ended. The queen consort finally understood that her husband's decision had not been an attempt to push her children away. It had been an attempt to protect the difference between family affection and royal authority. That distinction still hurt, but it no longer felt like rejection. William also recognized the larger lesson. The prince understood that modern royal families carry private relationships into an institution built around strict public roles. The future king saw why those two worlds could not simply be treated as identical. Clear boundaries, painful as they might sometimes feel, could prevent much deeper damage later. Charles then approved clearer procedures, separating personal invitations, charitable consultations, and formal palace meetings. The change was simple, but its meaning was powerful. Nobody should again be left guessing whether a family suggestion had become an official command. Later, Charles and Camilla prepared to enter another private engagement together. Before the doors opened, the king quietly asked whether she was all right. "Yes," she answered. That was enough. The chair Charles pushed back that afternoon became the symbol of the entire episode. A king willing to stop everything when royal boundaries blurred, but also a husband and father figure determined to restart the conversation once everyone understood where those boundaries truly stood. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.